We live in interesting times. Today's stories. Austria simulates response to migrants in a border exercise. Myanmar and Laos burn drugs on World Drug Day. An 85-year-old appeared in the dock for the Franco-era stolen babies trial. U.S. Defense Chief visits China as tensions simmer. Plus, Philippine ambassador says less than 3% of annual remittances come from OFWs in Canada. Hello everyone, I am Eliza Gonzalez Manglikmod, bringing you stories from around the globe, and this is Eagle News, Washington, D.C. Several hundred Austrian police officers and soldiers performed an exercise on the country's southern border with Slovenia on Tuesday to simulate different responses to any repeat of 2015's migrant crisis. Over 500 policemen and 220 soldiers took part at the border crossing, a spy field. Interior Minister Herbert Kickl, who oversaw the exercise along with Defense Minister Mario Kunasek, said a state which cannot protect its borders when needed loses its credibility. Both men are members of the far-right Freedom Party, which since last year has been the junior partner in a coalition government under conservative Chancellor Sebastian Kurz, which has been at pains to emphasize its anti-immigration message. Among the military hardware on display on Tuesday were two Black Hawk helicopters. During the exercises, police cadets played the role of migrants, standing at border gates asking to be let in. The event also saw the first outing for a new police border protection force comprising some 600 officers, dubbed the Puma Unit. Several thousand migrants passed through Spy Field in the summer of 2015 as part of the Balkan route towards Northern Europe, although local police say the current rate of such crossings is almost zero. A clampdown on immigration was a key message from the FPOE and the Kyrgyz People Party in the last year's elections, and the government has made clear its wish for a restrictive policy on an EU level, with an emphasis on the need to toughen up the EU's external borders. Last week, Kurz said the specter of a repeat of the crisis of 2015, which he said would be a catastrophe if the EU did not agree a common position. Meanwhile, he has made common cause with high-profile politicians from the Bavarian CSU who have been clashing with German Chancellor Angela Merkel by demanding a harder line in migration policy. Myanmar and Laos mark World Drug Day with dramatic torching ceremonies, setting a huge stockpile of pills, cannabis, heroin, and opium on fire. Laos drug officials torched around 40 kilograms of heroin and tens of thousands of yaba pills Tuesday, a small but significant fraction of the narcotics burned on World Drug Day in a region awash with illegal substances. The ceremony was among several destruction events that took place across Southeast Asia, home to the infamous Golden Triangle, a zone bisecting Thailand, Myanmar, China, and Laos that is the world's second-largest drug-producing area. Record amounts of methamphetamine pills and ice, the highly addictive crystallized version, are pushed out across the region and as far as Japan and Australia, prompting massive seizures this year. Sharing borders with 5 countries, poor and landlocked Laos is a key transit route for Myanmar-made meth, as well as a producer of opium, the raw ingredient of heroin. Bricks of gray-colored heroin and piles of vanilla-scented yaba pills, which contain caffeine and methamphetamine, were torched in Zam Nhua, a small northeastern town that is a gateway to Vietnam and a popular trafficking route. Mountainous, sparsely populated, and with porous borders, Laos is a well-used route for drug traffickers. Authorities have had some success in stemming the trade, but say increasing cross-border cooperation is the only way to combat the drug manufacturers in Myanmar's lawless Wa state and the crime gangs that distribute their product. Officials said the country also hosted ceremonies in Mandalay and Taunggyi, destroying narcotics worth $187 million in total. Thailand began its torching of drugs earlier, destroying more than 6 tons of narcotics on Monday, the bulk of which was methamphetamine. Major seizures worth tens of millions of dollars have shattered records across the region this year, including a $45 million of yaba and crystal meth from Myanmar discovered in Bangkok last month. UNODC has urged governments in the Golden Triangle to tackle corruption to stamp out the illicit drug trade in the region, estimated to be worth $40 billion. Up next, an 85-year-old appeared in the dock for the Franco-era stolen babies trial. U.S. Defense Chief visits China as tensions simmer. Eagle News Washington, D.C. will return in a moment. Welcome back. You are watching Eagle News Washington, D.C. The first trial in Spain over thousands of suspected cases of babies stolen from their mothers during the Franco era opened in Madrid Tuesday as an 85-year-old Spanish doctor appeared in the dock. About 50 demonstrators protested outside the court as Eduardo Vela, who worked as a gynecologist at the now-defunct San Ramon Clinic in Madrid, arrived in court. Some carried signs that read "Justice and Human Rights for Stolen Babies." Vela is accused of having, in 1969, taken Inés Madrigal, now aged 49, from her biological mother and given her to another woman who raised her and was falsely certified as her birth mother. Prosecutors are seeking an 11-year jail term for falsifying official documents, illegal adoption, unlawful detention, and certifying a non-existent birth. In a dark and often overlooked chapter of General Francisco Franco's 1939 to 1975 dictatorship, the newborns of some left-wing opponents of the regime or unmarried or poor couples were removed from their mothers and adopted, and the practice was later expanded. New mothers were frequently told their babies had died suddenly within hours of birth and the hospital had taken care of their burials when in fact they were given or sold to another family. Madrigal, a railway worker who heads the Murcia branch of the SOS Stolen Babies Association, said she did not expect Vela would provide answers about her origins or apologize, but she hoped his 2-day trial would mark a turning point that leads the authorities to reopen investigations into other stolen babies cases. She told reporters outside the court a mother can never forget her son. Mothers want to tell their children that they did not abandon them, but above all, they want to know that they are well. The practice began after Franco came to power after Spain's 1936 to 1939 civil war, pitting left-wing Republicans against conservative nationalists loyal to the general, who was seeking to purge Spain of Marxist influence. U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis arrived in Beijing on his first ever visit to China on Tuesday, aiming to find room for military cooperation as security tensions between the two superpowers edge higher. With Washington and Beijing locked in an escalating trade war and the Pentagon alarmed over China's placement of weapons on disputed islands in the South China Sea, Mattis said he would seek areas where the two sides share interests, including persuading North Korea to give up its nuclear arsenal. Mattis is scheduled to meet his Chinese counterpart, Defense Minister Wei Fenghe, for the first time, as well as other top officials to take measure of their views. Mattis said the last time a U.S. Defense Secretary visited China was 4 years ago, and communications between the two militaries need strengthening. In a statement ahead of the visit, Chinese Defense Ministry spokesman Ren Guoqiang said they should work together to make the bilateral military relationship an important stabilizing factor in the relationship between the two countries. But China's state-run Global Times newspaper warned in an editorial on Tuesday that Mattis should listen rather than criticize. Philippine ambassador says less than 3% of annual remittances come from OFWs in Canada. That's next. Eagle News Washington, D.C. will return shortly. This is Eagle News Washington, D.C. I am Eliza Gonzalez Manglikmot. Philippine ambassador to Canada, Petronila Garcia, says less than 3% of annual remittances to the Philippines come from overseas Filipino workers there. Thomas Likeness reports.
The Philippine ambassador to Canada says although 10% of all OFWs live in this country, they account for less than 3% of the annual remittances to the Philippines. Her Excellency Petronila Garcia told a meet and greet of Philippine community organizations in Edmonton that Canada has been a favored destination for immigrants.
We are now among the top sources of immigrants. In fact, up to 2016, we were the top source of immigrants, and we have retained up to the top 3 sources of immigrants.
Ambassador Garcia says there are about 1 million Filipinos living in Canada, but despite their numbers, remittances have been declining.
We attribute this to the fact that when Filipinos come to Canada, they come as immigrants and they bring their families. So eventually there's nobody to send money home to.
Garcia adds Alberta has the fastest growing Filipino community in Canada. She met with Alberta Deputy Premier Sarah Hoffman and suggested the province should open a trade office in Manila.
The reason for this is that Manila is, of course, now one of the fastest growing economies in Asia, and we really are now have a very welcoming investment environment.
Garcia adds that in her meeting with Hoffman, she addressed one other issue critical to immigrants.
There was a meeting of the Filipino leaders earlier this month, and they talked about the challenges faced by the Philippine immigrants here in Canada, primarily the matter of credentials recognition. And she shared with us that this is not unique to the Philippines, the Philippine diaspora here. The matter of credentials recognition is always a challenge for immigrants, but the government is working towards ways to address this and are willing to work with us, and we express our willingness to begin a conversation about this.
Garcia thanked the Alberta government for declaring every June Philippine Heritage Month. The ambassador was in Edmonton to attend a post-anniversary celebration of the 120th year of Philippine independence. In Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, Thomas I. Likeness, Eagle News. I'm 1 with 25.
Thank you, Thomas. That is today's Eagle News Washington, D.C. Join us tomorrow for stories that matter to you. Visit our websites at eaglenews.ph and eaglenewslive.com. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/eaglenewsph. Thank you for watching. I am Eliza Gonzalez Manglikmot, always 1 with 25.